"Take off that darn thing," said Prosecutor Evans sharply, pulling the medal of courage from Cooper's chest. The courtroom fell silent. Some looked down. Others dropped their pens. Wilson stepped forward, frozen as if caught in a gunshot. Cooper did not flinch, but straightened up, masking his pain, and calmly met the prosecutor's gaze. In his hand was the medal, worn down like an old wound. "You have not shamed me, comrade prosecutor," he spoke quietly, as if into a battlefield radio. "You spat in the faces of those whose names are carved on tombstones without stars. That is all I had to say." Evans threw the medal onto the judge's bench. The dull clang of metal echoed like a gunshot in a closed room. Judge Mitchell flinched, but said nothing. The room felt charged, as if a storm was about to break. Cooper buttoned his jacket, where a hole gaped on his chest like an unhealed wound. A minute passed. Everything was still. Suddenly, the door creaked open quietly. A man in an old greatcoat appeared in the doorway. His shoulder boards marked the rank of Colonel General. Without looking at anyone, he strode directly toward the prosecutor. The room held its breath. "Comrade Colonel General Morgan," whispered Wilson awkwardly, "you did not announce yourself." "Quiet, son," the general replied without turning around. His voice was soft, but carried a familiar command tone. Evans only caught sight of the figure in the greatcoat when Morgan drew close. The prosecutor pulled his shoulders back as if to take control, but the general stopped, glanced at the medal on the table, and quietly said, "Where do you get such authority? Comrade prosecutor, is it appropriate to dismantle someone else's decorations?" The courtroom remained still, veterans present not moving an inch, yet a faint gleam flickered in his tired eyes, as if aged metal had caught a faint ray of light. Evans collected himself, lifted his chin firmly. "Please refrain from interfering, Comrade Colonel General," he stated clearly, striving for the utmost formality. "The question regarding the authenticity of the medals will be resolved through legal proceedings. The inspection report is already part of the case file. Allow us to proceed with the hearing." General Morgan slowly rested his hand on the table, covering the medal with his palm. It felt as though his hand bore the weight of a sarcophagus lid. The judge abruptly rose, seemingly ready to back the prosecutor's authority to conduct the case, but Morgan's voice stopped him. "When was this medal awarded?" said Morgan, each word carefully muted, as if weighing its significance. I stood nearby. At that moment, I commanded the brigade. We were evacuating the 400 wounded from the gorge. Half the crew was injured. Cooper was pulled out from under heavy fire. His company commander died while covering the retreat. If anyone here dares to call that medal a counterfeit, they call the blood of my soldiers counterfeit, and I consider such a lie treason against the state. The silence deepened further. The secretary lowered her gaze to the protocol document, though her hand trembled as she held the pen. Spectators sitting in the balcony felt the gravity of those words, as if a cliff had suspended above the hall. The prosecutor clenched his throat in an effort to quell his shaking voice. "The charges rely on documents," he pronounced. "Doubts about the legality of the award will be discussed later. For now, I kindly request to remove individuals not involved in the proceedings from the room." The general slightly tilted his head toward the veteran. "If you remove me, remove Cooper. Take away his medal, you will be left with an empty hall, because I will make one call and 2 regiments will be sitting here. They will all ask you why your paper is more important than their blood." Judge Mitchell coughed, and without looking at the prosecutor said in a muffled voice, "I announce a recess of 10, no more than 10 minutes. Urgent meeting in my office." The session was temporarily suspended. He struck the small gavel on the desk, but its sound was fragile, as if the wooden surface was weakened by dry rot. Then the judge quickly moved to the door, pulling his robe as if donning armor. Almost everyone rose. Only Cooper remained still, as if rooted into the stone floor. Not a single feature of his face twitched. The general approached quietly, took the medal, and handed it to the veteran. The veteran accepted the award delicately with 2 fingers, as if it were a fragile artifact. "Good morning, Comrade Colonel," said the general with a sigh. "It has been a long time." Cooper barely nodded. "Not much time left, Alexander Smith," he muttered. "But we must hold on, or the young will completely forget the price." The general nodded and turned to his assistant. "Where is my briefcase?" Then he looked back at Evans. "We will meet again." The prosecutor twisted his lips but remained silent. He felt the cold, appraising gaze of the audience. The passionately charged scene spread through the hall like whispered water seeping into sand. As the general stepped out, Wilson closed the door behind him. At that moment, while most people moved toward the exit, an elderly woman wearing a dark headscarf sat down on the nearest bench and, trembling, began pulling yellowed papers from her bag. It seemed as if the fragile silence could shatter into thunder at any instant. The veteran turned toward the woman. She lifted her eyes and said, "This is my husband's death notice. They told me the medal awarded for him is fake as well. You know who I should trust." He did not have time to answer. Wilson announced that the break would last longer. His voice wavered, as if the sea was tossing a sailor on rough waves. Cooper went up to the window, where the weak November light barely filtered through frosted glass. He clenched the medal, and in that moment, his hand trembled slightly. It was as if the painful memory of that day in the ravine returned, when a grenade tore through the air and the commander shielded his soldiers. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind. Evans came closer. "Your senior comrade spoke for you," the prosecutor said with a faint, mocking tone. "But faith in old merits won't help you when the documents are against you. Evidence is what matters." Cooper did not turn around. "Evidence lies buried," he whispered. "But when it wakes, its noise carries far." Evans wanted to respond, yet the door opened again. A thin young man wearing glasses entered the hall. It was Nikolai, Cooper's grandson, a civil lawyer who had barely passed the bar exams. He looked around the room and immediately approached his grandfather. "Let us sit," he said softly, while gently touching him, the veteran's elbow. "Grandpa, you have a joint?" Cooper said, unwilling to show any weakness. He nodded slightly and took a seat. Nikolai handed the thermos filled with tea to the elder. The prosecutor glanced briefly at their brief family exchange, smirked, and walked away. The silence slowly began to lift as people whispered amongst themselves, shuffled paperwork. Women exchanged knowing looks, and a young man with a notebook, likely a reporter for the local newspaper, wanted to approach the veteran, but hesitated. Nikolai carefully took a stack of documents from his briefcase. There was a petition for an independent expert review. The judge had to review it. The story was gaining momentum. Share where you are watching from, and be sure to subscribe. Cooper looked at the papers, like they were a new challenge to conquer under fire. "We will figure this out," he said briefly. Sitting there, everything seemed calm. Another minute passed. Then a sharp sound came through the loudspeaker. The secretary asked everyone to return to their seats. The judge resumed the session, and the tension snapped tight like a string. While the continuation formula was being read aloud, Cooper noticed a slight nervous twitch of the prosecutor Evans's eyelid beneath the brim of his cap. It was clear that Evans had not expected the general's appearance. At that moment, a cold certainty was born within the veteran. The fight would be long, but every document had two sides. Right then, in the heart of the tension, memories from the past stirred behind his back. The scent of smoke and hot metal filled the air, and he heard the clatter of armored personnel carrier tracks, long separated from reality by decades. He blinked and once again saw the courtroom, the prosecutor's cardboard emblem, and thought, "The first shot has been fired, It will only get more difficult from here. The session went on, yet a whole stack of new questions already lay like heavy bricks on the tables. People sat as if they had intercepted an urgent radio signal. None of them knew who would emerge victorious. The only certainty was that the veteran who lost his medals in front of the entire world would not leave quietly. When the judge called the next witness, the light in the room shifted. Through tall windows came a beam of morning sunlight that touched Cooper's chest. He felt a warm, almost living sensation at the very spot where a wound had recently been. This warmth became an invisible vow. He would stand firm until the end, even if his knee gave out and his breath ran dry. The alarm clock's rustling sounded at 4 o'clock, while the winter sky still hid its stars. Cooper opened his eyes without surprise. Sleep had not visited him in many years after the first rooster's crow. He slowly sat on the edge of the bed, felt the crutches of memory in his aching knee, and sighed quietly, reaching for the bedside table. There lay his neatly folded dress uniform jacket. The buttons gleamed faintly, but the veteran ran his palm over them as if inspecting soldiers before formation. On the table stood a dark wooden box. He opened it and saw 6 awards: the red and gold star for bravery, a heavy cross, the Order of Courage, a modest medal for service, a combat participant's badge, a commemorative Defender of the Fatherland token, and a small round one. The medal awarded for the mountain pass at 3,700 meters was presented quietly without any ceremony. Each award rested in its own compartment, resembling artillery shells stored in an ammunition crate. He looked at them as if they were the faces of comrades long gone, and hesitantly touched the silky lining. In the kitchen, there was a soft clinking of dishes. Alexander Smith's son, Alexei, who was around 40 years old, was preparing oatmeal. He never asked questions because he knew his father preferred silence in the morning. The son simply placed a plain mug and a teapot on the table. The window reflected the moonlight, turning the kitchen into a moving carriage where everyone knows their destination, but never wonders why. Cooper sat down and cupped the warm mug in his hands. The tea smelled of linden blossoms with a faint, smoky scent. Alexei added a spoonful of old honey from the village. The wind outside stirred the bare branches, and a thin shadow slid across the wall, as if an invisible hand had inscribed a secret command. "Will it be a difficult day, Father?" Alexei asked softly while sitting across from him. "It will," the veteran answered briefly. He did not like to express his fears with words. The son lowered his eyes to the table. Mitchell had said, "The prosecutor wants to declare these awards invalid to dismiss your claim against the construction company." "Mitchell is right," Cooper admitted, "but it is not about the construction. They want to break the memory. As long as a soldier still has his medals, the memory lives on." Alexei nodded. He had never served. His draft year coincided with his mother's illness, so his father removed him from the draft list. Yet he understood that for a veteran, a medal is more than just metal. It is a tuning fork that aligns the conscience. They ate breakfast in silence. Next, Cooper carefully pulled on his tunic. His hands moved slowly along the sleeves, as if putting on armor. Alexander Smith handed him a box filled with awards. The veteran took each medal and pinned it to his chest. There was a soft click of the clasp, a faint chime of metal, and the weight pressed against the fabric. He worked with focus and without hurry, fully aware of the exact spot where every ribbon should hang. Once the final badge was in place, Cooper exhaled deeply. Alexander placed an old photograph in front of him. The black and white picture showed 5 soldiers standing in a snow-covered valley, holding a small boy, a refugee from a remote village. Their faces were worn, but their eyes sparkled with life. 4 of those soldiers had already been laid to rest beneath the ground. The 5th was Cooper. "I will make a copy of this photo," the son said quietly. Let it hang in the hallway. The veteran nodded, affirming the plan. Later, in the hallway, Cooper struggled to put on tall boots, struggling to fit his feet into the shafts. The wooden floor creaked beneath him. Marina, his daughter-in-law, appeared and adjusted the vest covering his chest. Will you be going to court today? Take care of your legs, she said softly. I'm taking care, he replied. Yet time was short, and his leg could wait. Help was needed. Marina lowered her eyes, as though ashamed of someone else's falsehood. Outside, darkness stretched across the sky. The engine of an early minibus grumbled in the distance. The sky broke apart into gray slabs of cloud. Alexander brought an old Volga from the garage. The engine coughed at first, then found a steady rhythm. The veteran sat down beside him. The seat sagged slightly beneath the weight of the metals. He looked out at empty streets, sparse lampposts, and quiet bus stops. It seemed the city was still asleep and had not yet woken. He sensed that someone's honor would be judged by papers today. If it comes to that, said Alexander Smith, turning the steering wheel, I will refuse the shift and stay nearby. No need. You have a family. Cooper and I will manage. The court is a battlefield of young determination. My blood runs thick, but slower. They remained silent throughout the journey. Upon arriving at the courthouse, a young woman in a gray coat was handing out flyers. She approached the car but stepped back when she saw the uniform jacket. Thin snowflakes landed softly on the visor of the prosecutor's guard's cap by the main entrance. The guard nodded respectfully and let them in. The lobby smelled of polished tiles. The veteran took off his gloves and slipped them into his pocket. Alexander helped him climb the steps. On the second floor, Cooper was waiting. He gripped a folder so tightly his fingers turned pale. "Grandpa, are you ready?" he whispered. "A soldier is ready when he stands," answered Cooper. He took a box of evidence and moved forward. Alexander lingered, looking at his father. "Good luck." Cooper touched his son's shoulder, like a commander brushing dust off a soldier's greatcoat, and followed the grandson. The courthouse corridor stretched long, lined with official doors. Behind each door echoed unknown lives, muffled voices, creaking chairs, locks clicking. They reached courtroom number 5. Above the door hung a nameplate with the judges' and secretaries' names. Cooper took a deep breath and opened the door. The incident involving Huckson, which would later appear in newspaper clippings, happened an hour after their arrival. But for now, only strict official words and the chiming of bells filled the air. The secretary's pencil moved steadily as the formulas became clearer. The lawyer's presence was palpable. An elderly man sat on a bench with his eyes closed, as if he were listening to distant echoes. Nicholas took notes, occasionally glancing at the prosecutor, who held a folder tightly secured with a rubber band. Evans appeared calm, yet the pulse on his neck was visibly pounding. The scene where the medals were torn off unfolded rapidly. As soon as the witness interrogation protocol was completed, the prosecutor rose and demanded an immediate examination of the awards. The judge was surprised, but allowed the order to be presented. Cooper stood up and took a step forward, but the prosecutor did not wait, approaching himself and grabbing the medal forcefully. The woman's scream from the gallery shattered the silence. What followed, the veteran's words, the general's entrance, the recess, fractured the slow passage of time. These moments still flickered vividly before Cooper's eyes as he sat by the window after the break. He recalled his morning oatmeal, the warm tea, the pale light of dawn. It seemed that between that tranquility and his current fury lay not just a road, but an entire lifetime war. Absent-mindedly, he touched the edge of his jacket, where the weight of the metal still remained imprinted. The fabric's edges frayed under his fingers, the threads pricking slightly. Yet a strange relief washed over him. The medal had been removed many years ago when he was transferred to the medical unit. But back then, he had felt nothing. Now, the pain was sharp and vivid because it meant he was still here. He was not forgotten. The secretary announced the judge's return. None of those present noticed how quietly the scene unfolded on the table. Among the prosecutor's folders lay a white envelope. It had no stamp or address, only the name, Nikolai. Catching movement from the corner of his eye, a young man in a trainee uniform quietly placed the envelope down, bowed, and left. Evans glanced at it, frowned, yet opened the envelope. After a brief pause, he read the single sentence inside, and his expression grew dark. Quickly, he hid the note back inside. Nikolai observed everything with a calm demeanor, but his heart was pounding. The letter contained information that could change the course of the trial. However, as the court session resumed, no one knew what the envelope held. The bell rang. People stood up. The sun continued to pierce through the courtroom like a silver blade, as if reminding everyone that every darkness has its crack of light. Cooper took a deep breath and thought, "Soldiers have always known that dawn is behind us." The fiery sunset gave way to a gray gloom when Cooper returned home. He slowly removed his belt as if unbinding an old wound. Medals lay spread across the table like silent witnesses. In the kitchen, one lamp burned softly. The smell of buckwheat porridge reminded him of military mess tins, but today even that scent felt foreign. His son poured tea and was silent for a while as the spoon tapped on the glass. Finally, he whispered, "Father, does it hurt that those people consider your medals just a paper tag?" Cooper raised his eyes. There were no tears, only the dry wind of fatigue. He replied quietly, "It hurts, but pain is no excuse to give up." Later that night, his grandson Nikolai entered holding copies of protocols written in neat handwriting. "Grandfather," he said, "tomorrow the prosecution will file a petition to revoke your status as a victim. They say you are a fraud, the medals fake, the certificates forged." "This will be quick," the veteran sneered. "And more, today they praised me, and tomorrow they question everything." Nikolai sat down, exhaustion casting shadows beneath his eyes. "I will file a counterclaim, but they have already bypassed the commission, called the archives. They want lies, they want victory." His son placed the kettle back on the stove. "You can refuse, Father. Say your health does not allow it." Cooper sighed. "If I quit now, who will remain? Those who are even more afraid." The clock struck midnight. The wind rattled the shutters outside. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. A postman stood waiting on the threshold. He handed an official notice addressed to the veteran's wife. It was an order to appear at the tax office to clarify income details. His wife quietly sank into a chair. Her face paled. "What do they want from us?" she whispered. "To break us," Nikolai replied. "To make grandfather give up." The night stretched on. The veteran sat at the table, running his fingers over the medals. He remembered the young sergeant who died on the mountain slope. That sergeant never married, never gave his mother a final word. Cooper murmured, "Forgive me, brother. I will endure." His words dissolved into silence. In the morning, a dark car pulled up under the window. Two men in formal suits climbed the stairs. They handed Cooper a summons, a new examination of the awards. The son clenched his fists. "This is harassment," the elder visitor calmly answered. "The state must verify authenticity. That is the procedure." Then they left, leaving behind the scent of an expensive cologne. In the evening, the servant Stepanov called. His voice trembled. "Brother, someone came by asking about you. They want me to say that you bought a medal." "And what did you say?" "I sent them to Leisha, but they intimidated the neighbors. This is serious. Around midnight, Nikolai returned from the university. His face was pale. "I have been expelled," he said. Dekhan signed the order without any explanation. In the veteran's chest, it felt like a string had snapped. "Because of me?" he quietly asked. "Because of us," the grandson replied. "We went against the current. The wife brought a candle to avoid waking the neighbors with the electric lamp. The flame flickered, casting shadows on the wall. The sun poured over 100 drops. Father, is that enough?" The words sounded heavy. "You fought your whole life. Now it is our turn. We will manage on our own." The veteran shook his head. "You will manage without a name, without the truth. They will take your name away tomorrow if you remain silent today." Suddenly, the grandson took out a voice recorder. He played the recording. The voice of Prosecutor Evans was muffled and quick-tempered. "Those old soldiers are garbage. They should stay quiet. Yet they flaunt their medals as if someone owes them worship." The recording stopped, and the grandson exhaled. The judge's assistant handed it over. He risked his position. Cooper looked at his wife, his son, and grandson. The mood was tense but sincere. They had fear and lies. That would be enough to see it through to the end. The night ended. At dawn over Moscow, thick smoke from stovepipes stretched across the sky. The city was waking up. The veteran, leaning on his cane, stepped onto the balcony. His breath evaporated in the cold air. He raised his hand. It was as if he greeted those who had gone to the earth. The scar on his palm reminded him, courage. It is the calm within the storm, not a cry. The morning brought a gray sky and a sharp wind. The veteran arrived at the military enlistment office to verify his documents. The hallway smelled of paint and cold soup from the cafeteria. A young employee with her hair tied in a bun reviewed the papers and said without looking up, "Take these to the chief." "You understand?" It was just protocol. The chief turned out to be a stout major whose wall displayed certificates for impeccable service. He flipped through a folder and chuckled. "Your certificate of combat participation is outdated. We must request a new one." The veteran responded calmly. "The archive holds the records. The request will take 3 months." "I do not have 3 months," the veteran said. "The trial is ongoing." The major shrugged. "That is not for me to decide. Submit a formal request. You will get the stamp on the first floor." The real reason for the delay was obvious: to stall until public attention faded. On the way out, a man in a gray coat approached the veteran. "Ivan Petrovich," he asked. "I am lawyer Smirnov, representing a charitable foundation. We can help cover lawyer fees." Cooper politely declined. "Thank you. I have my defender, your grandson. He is talented but lacks experience. Against the prosecution, you need heavy artillery." The veteran replied, "Sometimes a bayonet is more reliable than a cannon," and headed for the door. At home, his wife was reading the newspaper. On the front page, there was an interview with the developer against whom the veteran had testified in a related case. The developer, smiling, said, We respect heroes, but in our era, it is time to build the future, rather than dwell on the past." Cooper folded the newspaper and placed it in the drawer. He understood that the adversaries struck on all fronts. In the evening, his grandson brought a folder containing copies of the case aimed at discrediting veterans. He spread the documents across the table. "The pattern repeats," he explained. "First comes humiliation, followed by the verification of medals, then financial pressure. After half a year, the person vanishes from public attention." His son cautiously asked, "How many of them won?" "None," Nikolai replied. "They gave up." Cooper ran his hand over the tabletop as if checking its sturdiness. "That means we will be the first." Late at night, the veteran went out into the yard. The moonlight illuminated the old lindens. He sat down on a bench. His hand trembled. Memories flashed through his mind, like eyes from the past. "Hold on, Commander!" The radio operator shouted beneath the sound of machine gun fire. Back then he endured, but now in peacetime, holding on proved more difficult. Instead of bullets, accusations flew. Instead of mines, bureaucratic papers. A janitor with a gray beard approached him. "I saw it on the news," he said softly. "It is unfair." The veteran nodded. Honesty is not a commodity anymore. The janitor sat beside him. "My father returned without legs. It took 3 years to receive his medal while the paperwork was processing. And now officials claim the archive burned down. He died before getting his pension. I'm sorry. We must fight. Otherwise, they will trample our children into the dirt as well." The veteran looked toward the house windows where his family slept. "I will fight." Sleep would not come during the night. He rose, opened the safe, and took out a letter written by a serviceman many years ago. The letter contained a brief paragraph. "If ever someone tries to strip you of your name, remember us. Our names have already been erased. Let yours remain." The paper yellowed. The ink faded, yet the meaning struck deep into the heart. At that moment, the phone rang intermittently. An unfamiliar female voice said, "Ivan Petrovich, this is a correspondent from the Evening District newspaper. I have heard about your case. I want to conduct an interview." He paused. "The media can either help or distort the truth." "Come in the morning," he finally replied. "No sensationalism, just facts." "Agreed." The next morning, journalist Olga Semenova arrived promptly at 8. She held a notebook and a simple pencil, sat at the table, and switched on a cassette recorder. "Tell me, who awarded you the Order of Courage?" The veteran adjusted his collar. "The order is not given. It is earned." She lowered her eyes. "Sorry, then for which battle?" He spoke briefly. A snowy mountain pass, evacuating a wounded soldier under fire. No heroics or grandeur, just the straightforward duty done. Olga listened silently. When the recording ended, she said, "I don't know if this will be published, but I will try." "Don't try. Just do it." The word "try" sounded like a preemptive excuse. By noon, a television crew arrived. Neighbors peeked from windows, but the cameraman was not allowed to film. The veteran's family decided, "It is too soon for an interview. We need to gather the documents." Later that day, Cooper went to the notary to certify copies. In the queue, people talked about bread prices and rising tariffs. Then a man in an expensive coat approached him. "I represent the company Garstroy. We offer you an agreement. You renounce any claims, and in return, we transfer a significant sum regarding your grandson. Treatment, education, everything will be covered." The veteran glanced at the cloak with the golden tie clip. "Who said we have a price?" he asked. "Everyone does," the other replied with a smirk. "The question is only about the numbers." Cooper turned around and slowly walked away. In the evening, the electricity in the house went out. The line was down. The neighbors complained, yet the technician said, "It is a localized accident." The grandson brought out candles. The wife handed over a warm blanket. "Are you cold?" the veteran asked. "You don't die from the cold," she answered. "You die from indifference." Late at night, when the street was shrouded in fog, the veteran sat at the table. He took out a blank sheet of paper and wrote, "The Army is a duty, not a business." He placed the paper into the folder containing his identification. He knew that tomorrow, those who measure honor by money would see it. At dawn, the sun woke him. Below, dozens of people stood holding flags of veteran organizations. Cooper stepped onto the balcony. Gray hats, canes, and kilts were visible. They were silent, but held boxes of awards in their hands. One man lifted a lid to reveal the Order of the Red Star. "If they touch one of us," he said loudly, "we will throw our medals at the courthouse walls. Let them drown in their own lies." The veteran pressed his hand to his chest. Words were unnecessary. That same day, a second envelope was placed in the mailbox. It was a notice about revising the veteran's pension. The reason? Doubts about the authenticity of his service record. The wife sat down, clutching the envelope to her chest. "How long will they keep digging?" she whispered. "Until they run out of dirt," he answered. "While we are standing," the son replied. "But we will not collapse." The grandson contacted his classmates. 2 agreed to assist in preparing a complaint to the prosecutor's office about Evans's actions. They arrived in the evening and laid out the documents. Earlier that day, a second envelope had been placed in the mailbox, a notification regarding the veteran's pension review. The reason was doubt about the authenticity of his service record. The wife sat down, clutching the envelope to her chest. "How much longer will they keep digging?" she whispered. "Until we are standing," the son answered. "But we will not collapse." The grandson gathered his law school friends in the kitchen. 2 arrived, tall Serov and not-so-tall Karpov. They brought thick law books, a stack of paper, and a corner stamp. Serov declared, "We are writing a complaint against the prosecutor. Everything will be done by the book. The grounds are abuse of authority and public humiliation of a serviceman." Karpov arranged the sheets. "We need exact dates of your battles, Ivan Petrovich." The veteran recited without hesitation. The crossing, date, time of departure, time of evacuation of the wounded. Karpov quickly jotted everything down with a pencil, as if he were a stenographer at a meeting. Outside, darkness thickened. On the table, sheets filled with official wording accumulated. "Hereby we declare, and we request an investigation." The ink shimmered in the lamplight. By midnight, the complaint was complete. The grandson carefully folded the documents into a folder. "Tomorrow I will take it to the registry," he said. "Personally, for a signature." The veteran nodded. Before going to sleep, he finally broke down. In the small room, surrounded by faded photographs, he sank to his knees and whispered, "Lord, not for me. I beg you, for my family." No tears fell, yet his shoulders trembled. His wife entered silently and placed her hand on his back. They sat together for a long time until the shaking ceased. At dawn, the 3 of them headed to the prosecutor's office building. A stone lion guarded the entrance. The grandson climbed the granite steps as if heading into battle. Inside, the air smelled of wax and paper. The guard checked the passport and led them to the reception window. A young woman wearing a uniform without any badges sat there. "Register your complaint," she said coldly. 5 days for review. "A signature to confirm receipt will suffice," Nikolai replied. The stamp hit the paper with a dull sound. The document disappeared into the box. The door closed behind them. Near the exit stood the same man from the city construction office. A smile played across his face. "Well," he said, "you have made your choice." "It was your choice," the veteran answered. In the evening, the veterans' organizations gathered in the officer's house. The tall hall smelled of old resin and polished parquet flooring. A red flag with a golden star hung on the stage. A gray-haired reserve major stepped up. "Friends, brothers, our comrade has been insulted. Who is ready to stand with him? Step forward." People rose one by one, placing their awards into a box. The rustling of velvet cases was louder than the applause. The veteran watched and felt the weight of responsibility grow even heavier. When the meeting ended, a gray-haired man in a coat without insignia approached him. "Ivan Petrovich, remember the machine gunner? I served with him. He died in the same battle. I keep his letter. It may be useful to you. It contains a description. The heroic deed, the original document signed by the division commander. The veteran took the envelope slowly and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Thank you. Today, you have revived memory," they said. They shook hands firmly without unnecessary words. He returned home late. On a bench near the entrance sat the neighbor Anna Pavlovna, with her stooped back and scarf over her head. "My dears, I heard on the radio. Stay strong, we pray for you," she said. "Thank you," the veteran replied. "Prayer is stronger than a snowdrift." The neighbor crossed herself. At night, he opened the machine gunner's letter again. The paper smelled of the gunpowder of the past. The lines contained only one wish. "If I leave this world, tell them what we stood for." He closed his eyes, and the trembling in his hands faded away. The answer was found: the village chief. The bloody dawn lit up the streets. A light rain tapped on the windowsill. The veteran dressed and stepped onto the balcony. In the square in front of the house, people stood quietly, women holding portraits of their fathers, men with graying temples, and schoolchildren wearing red ribbons over their chests. They did not shout or wave banners. They stood in silence. This quiet was louder than any demonstration. The veteran raised his hand and placed his palm over his heart. Silence responded. The day continued in the long corridors of the tax office. His wife sat on a hard chair holding a bag. The clerk monotonously asked questions. Where did the funds for the apartment purchase come from? Why was help sent for last year regarding the grandson? Why did one of the transfers come from the Veterans Foundation? Every proof had to be explained, every signature confirmed. The clerk nodded, ticked boxes, and added sheet after sheet. When the questioning ended, his wife stepped outside, leaned against the wall, and closed her eyes. The wind carried the scent of dust and gasoline. A veteran approached her, steadying himself on a cane. "You held on," he said softly. "I'm exhausted," she admitted quietly. "I am 66 years old. I never imagined we would have to prove once more that we are not thieves." He embraced her tightly, feeling her shoulder tremble. "We are not thieves. We are witnesses." She nodded. Tears did not fall. It seemed they had already dried up. On their way home, they noticed a sign stating that a security guard was needed, preference given to veterans. The veteran smirked. "Preference? Leave your medals at the door," he muttered under his breath. His wife looked at him. "They say cynicism prolongs life. I do not want to live longer. I want to live with honor," he responded. That evening, the local officer arrived holding a protocol regarding a breach in the storage regulations of cold weapons. It turned out someone had filed a complaint. The veteran's apartment contained an unregistered Army bayonet. "You have 3 days to correct the violation," the officer stated bluntly. "The bayonet is a museum gift," the son objected. "It is disarmed. The cutting edge is gone." "That is not for me to decide," the officer replied, handing over a document for signature. After he left, the wife sat on the edge of a chair. "They pressure us with trivial matters, strike at the rooftops to bring down the walls," remarked their grandson. During the night, the veteran stepped onto the balcony and breathed in the cold air. A metallic taste rose in his throat. On the horizon, the lights of trucks flickered. He remembered the winter in the gorge, the cold, stale bread, the radio with dying batteries. That was everything then. It seemed like an end, but it turned out to be a beginning. He whispered, "If you hear me, brothers, know that I stand." At 3 o'clock in the morning, he dreamed of a clay road covered with rainwater. He walked along it barefoot, holding an order in his hands. The road disappeared into darkness. In the distance stood Prosecutor Evans, laughing. The veteran continued forward until the laughter faded away. He woke up sweating, sat on the bed. His heart pounded heavily. like a drum's march. He went to the wash basin, splashed cold water on his face, and looked in the mirror. Wrinkles, gray hair. Yet his eyes were alive. At dawn, he dressed in civilian clothes, hid the order in his pocket, and left a note for his son on the table. "I am going to the archive." The archive was in an old building across the river. The hall smelled of paper dust. An elderly archivist found the battalion's files. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the yellowed pages. "Here is the report, Commander," she said, "about your unit's feat." She pulled out a sheet and stamped it. "Correct." The veteran carefully took the copy. "Is this enough?" he asked. "Enough not to be ashamed," he replied. On the way back, he noticed posters near the bridge. "Build the future without the past." Young workers painted the railing. He stopped and looked at the river. The water ran past, carrying reflections away. He thought, "The past is not a burden, but an anchor, so the wind of lies does not sweep it away." In the evening, the family gathered at the table. Fresh documents from the archive lay on the cloth. His grandson carefully arranged them. "Grandfather, we have the proof. Tomorrow, we will take it to court." The son set a pot of borscht on the stove. The scent of bay leaves filled the kitchen. "One battle we have won," he said. "But the war is still ongoing." The veteran nodded. "The war for honor stretches beyond the trenches. We hold on." On the morning of the first hearing after the break, the courtroom was packed to the brim. People stood in the aisles, clutching their hats and briefcases tightly to their chests. Among them were veterans, journalists, students, and homemakers. Yet, no television crews had arrived. By a strange coincidence, all news teams had been assigned urgent tasks in other districts. Judge Mitchell entered wearing his robe and declared order. The case concerned a petition to annul Cooper's awards. The grandson rose and read aloud archival copies. The papers rustled softly. Evans maintained his composure, though his fingers tapped nervously on the table. Then, Nikolai pulled out a cassette tape, inserted it into an old tape recorder brought as physical evidence. The room heard the prosecutor's voice. Old soldiers were mere rubbish. The words echoed like a bell toll. Someone gasped. The judge struck his gavel. Evans suddenly stood up. The recording was obtained unlawfully. "I demand it be excluded from the case." But the judge, paling, ordered a forensic audio analysis. In the courthouse corridor, veterans stood shoulder to shoulder. One said, "If they try to remove that tape, we will return tomorrow with thousands of witnesses." The elders nodded. That very day, the Evening District newspaper published Olga Semyonova's article titled "Ordered to Forget," exposing how a soldier's honor is being destroyed. The issue sold out by morning. People on commuter trains read it and exchanged glances. Officials described the text as biased and overly emotional. Yet by evening, calls began coming into the capital from several regions. Veterans were preparing to send letters of support. A day later, the investigative committee contacted the court. The judge stepped into the hallway, listening on the phone and nodding, though his face darkened. Upon returning, he announced, "The session is postponed until the prosecutor Evans's actions are fully investigated." The courtroom erupted with murmurs. The veteran remained serious, knowing this was only halfway through the struggle. The following evening, the son came home looking pale. "They filed a formal report against me," he said. "They claim I am delaying reports. This is harassment," the grandson sighed. The veteran placed a hand on his son's shoulder, saying, "We are holding the line." Soon after, a summons arrived for the grandson. The university administration demanded an explanation for his political activities. Nikolai dressed formally and went to the dean's office. The dean, a stocky professor decorated for academic achievements, spoke at length about ethics. Nikolai calmly responded, "My ethics are to defend my family's honor." The dean raised an eyebrow. Honor cannot be graded. But without honor, grades mean nothing, the grandson replied. On the way out, a professor veteran stopped him. He shook his hand and said, "I was at your thesis defense. Stay strong. Not everyone here has forgotten their oath." A week later, Judge Dmitriev's assistant invited Nikolai to a park, sat him on a bench, and looked around cautiously. "I have documents, drafts of orders, where Evans approved the demolition of a memorial for construction projects. But I am afraid. If you remain hidden in the shadows, fear will win. It will remain eternal," said Nicholas. Dmitriev handed over the envelope. "Take care of yourselves. I am going on medical leave." The documents ended up with Semenova. She delivered them to the chief editor. He sighed deeply. "They will lock us up. Then let them imprison us for telling the truth," she said. The newspaper was released with an extra print run. On the front page, there was a counting photograph of the memorial, along with the caption, "Price of Silence." In the evening, people with flowers gathered outside the editorial office, thanking the journalists. At night, unknown assailants tried to set the printing house on fire, but the security guard called the firefighters in time. The story slipped beyond control. The investigative committee opened a case against Evans. He denied any guilt and spoke about a political setup. But the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Mitchell recused himself. A new judge was appointed from a neighboring region. While the procedures were ongoing, veterans displayed a large banner in the courtroom that read, "Honor can be taken away, but cannot be stolen." No one touched the banner. The security guards pretended not to notice. During the hearing, Nicholas summoned witness General Morgan. The general showed up in his old jacket, riddled with 3 bullet holes. He spoke about the wounded evacuation, how Cooper carried a young soldier to safety under fire. His words were as brief as commands in battle, yet the room listened without blinking. Even the new prosecutors lowered their eyes. However, the system didn't give up. Inspectors arrived at the veterinary clinic where his wife had worked in her childhood. They found violations of sanitary standards dating back to the year 1998. The fine they imposed was cruelly harsh. The son sold his car just to pay for it. When he handed the keys to the new owner, his eyes glistened with bitter moisture. He returned home on foot, but walked with steady steps. The veteran realized the enemy was attacking not at the front lines, but through the rear. He gathered his family. "They want to exhaust us, but fatigue is a poor advisor. We will make it because we have a reason to continue." His son nodded, and his wife squeezed her husband's hand. Nicholas spoke. "Grandfather, if we retreat now, we will drown. So we go forward." 2 weeks later, a round table was held at the journalist's house. Historians, lawyers, and writers attended. Semenova read excerpts from the case. An old writer with a beard reaching his shoulders said, "A nation that disrespects its soldiers risks being left without an army, and without an army, there is no state." Applause followed, brisk but heavy like gunfire in salvo. That same evening, a brief news report announced that the investigative committee had charged prosecutor Evans with abuse of power. People on trams rejoiced, but the veteran only clenched his fist. He knew the verdict was not yet decided. 2 days before the final hearing, his apartment doorbell rang. A lawyer arrived. A woman with gentle eyes said, "There is an offer. You withdraw claims against Evans. He issues a public apology. The court closes the case by reconciliation. In return, your family receives compensation." "How much?" the veteran asked calmly. Nicholas glanced at his grandfather. The amount could solve all their problems. The veteran slowly stood and went to the window. From the street came the clatter of a tram, the scent of burning chestnuts. "Tell your client," he said firmly, "that honor is not for sale, even for $7 million." The woman sighed. "I warned you." At night, the veteran went out to the courtyard and sat on an old bench. planes flickered across the sky. He recalled the voice of the sergeant who said, "If you are afraid, it means you are alive." He sighed and whispered, "Alive." The new judge began the hearing immediately. Prosecutors tried to prove that the awards were unverified, but archival documents, a general's testimony, and a machine gunner's letter formed a consistent narrative. After a short break, the judge returned and declared, "The case to annul Cooper's awards is dismissed. Materials will be sent to the military board to assess Prosecutor Evans's actions." The room did not applaud. Everyone remained silent. The silence was more powerful than any shout. The veteran closed his eyes. His chest felt lighter, but the weight of years stayed with him. After the session, a young man of about 20 approached him. "Grandpa, I read about you in the newspaper. My great-grandfather fought too. I was ashamed that no one remembers. But now, I am not." Cooper smiled for the first time in many days. To remember means to live. A month later, in a white hall with columns, a commission convened. The veteran spoke quietly, holding both hands together. "I do not ask for privileges. I ask that no soldier, living or fallen, be humiliated." The deputies listened. One tried to interrupt, but the chair raised a hand, saying, "Let the man finish." Cooper's final words were, "Honor does not need advertisement. It needs the protection of the law." The commission approved the draft. A week later, the State Duma passed a law against discrediting military merits. The president signed it. In the newspapers, a brief news report was published, yet within the homes of veterans, lights were illuminated. Evans appeared before the court. He stood in the very same courtroom where medals had been torn away. The crowd was smaller, but the memory felt stronger. The judge declared him guilty, assigned a punishment that deprived him of holding positions, along with a suspended sentence. Evans did not glance at the veteran. By evening that day, the veteran took a walk along the waterfront with his wife. The water shimmered beneath the final rays of the sun. He pulled a bravery medal from his pocket and pinned it onto his jacket. His wife looked and asked, "Are you wearing it again?" He responded, "I have not been wearing it. I have been preserving it." She took his arm, and they walked beside the water. A gentle breeze stirred the keel, but the medal did not jingle. The medal absorbed the silence. Newspapers could remain quiet, but the mail did not. Veterans went to post offices and mailed letters. Envelopes bearing military emblems piled up on the desk of the secretary of the Parliamentary Commission. The senior clerk transported them on a cart, shaking his head in disbelief. In 2 decades of service, he had never seen such a flood of mail. In a provincial town near Kursk, a history teacher held a lesson about Cooper's heroic deed. 13-year-old boys listened intently, holding their breath. One raised his hand and asked, "What if our grandfathers are accused too?" The teacher lifted his notebook and said, "Then you will stand up, just as this veteran did." In Tula, a giant banner reading, "Honor is our heritage," was unfurled in the central square by volunteers. The police tried to remove the fabric, but elderly people sat on it, as if defending a stronghold. There were no slogans, only silence. Silence that was heard throughout all of Russia. Reporter Semenova received a letter without a return address. Inside was an old photograph. A young Evans posed next to a developer during a hunting trip. On the back, a caption read, "Trophy Hunters." Semenova took the photo to the investigator. He looked at it carefully and put it in a folder. "Thank you. This will help confirm some questions about the conflict of interest. Aren't you afraid?" she asked. "I'm afraid," the investigator admitted. "But being afraid and doing your job are 2 different things." The phones of the Cooper family were constantly ringing. Calls came with threats one moment and pleas the next, all aimed at silencing the scandal. One voice warned, Your war is over. Do not awaken sleeping monsters." Cooper responded calmly, "Let the monster wake up and face the mirror." That very night, the entrance wall was spray-painted with the words, "Fake Hero." His wife saw it in the morning and sighed deeply. She grabbed a bucket of water and a rag and cleaned the graffiti herself. Passers-by stopped and offered to help. Within half an hour, the walls were spotless. The following day, Nikolai arrived at the university. On the department's wall hung a handwritten note. "A soldier is no comrade to a liar." He tore the paper down, ripped it up, and threw it in the bin. A veteran professor approached and said, "Words won't hurt if you wear the armor of truth." From a remote village, an elderly woman arrived wearing a faded dress. She stood near the entrance, clutching a bundle to her chest. "I am the mother of the sergeant you rescued from fire," she introduced herself. She wanted to see the man who shared the last loaf of bread with her son. The veteran invited her inside. She unwrapped the bundle, revealing a medal her son never had the chance to receive. She handed it to Cooper. "Keep it. To me, you both are one and the same." The veteran shook his head. "This medal will stay with you, but I will preserve its story." She smiled through her gray hair and lashes. The investigation was ongoing. Evans was called in for questioning. Journalists awaited him in the hallway. He covered his face with a newspaper. Yet a newspaper cannot hide responsibility. The developer spoke to the press and dismissed the matter as a publicity stunt by a group of retirees. That statement only added fuel to the fire. The workers stopped the concrete pouring and came outside. The foreman told his superiors, "My father fought in the war. I will not pour concrete on this part." Construction halted. A group of deputies proposed an amendment to extend the upcoming law to school textbooks. Lobbyists opposed it, and discussions went on late into the night. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The textbooks will be revised by a commission. The final court session lasted 1,300 minutes without a break. The courtroom was packed. The judge listened to experts and reviewed documents carefully. The veteran sat quietly like a soldier in a trench before an attack. When the verdict was announced, the crowd exhaled deeply. 1 week after the sentence, a photo exhibition titled "The Face of Honor" opened in Moscow. Cooper's portrait took the central spot, a silver-haired man with a stern gaze and a medal pinned to his chest. But the artist insisted that the caption only include the last name, without any ranks, so everyone would see the person, not the titles. One evening, the son entered his father's room. "Father, we won. What happens now?" The veteran sat by the window, watching the rain fall in silver streams. "Life goes on, and living is harder than fighting, but it must be done." He opened the desk drawer, pulled out an old map of the ravine, folded it carefully, and placed it back inside. Suddenly, a smile appeared on his face. "You know, I remembered the face of that radio operator." He was scared, but still laughed. Why? Because laughter is like telling fear to back off. "I'm going anyway." Outside, spring thunder rumbled loudly. His grandson came in and placed a cup of tea before him. "Grandfather, the commission decided to reinstate my education. I will keep studying." Cooper took the cup and inhaled the aroma. "Carry on. Knowledge is also a weapon, and weapons must be kept clean." A firework exploded in the distance. The neighbor's boy was celebrating his birthday. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder. The veteran flinched, but smiled. "I recognize this smell, but today it is peaceful." A year after those events, a law against discrediting military merits came into effect. A memorial parade was held in the square before the Kremlin. Cooper did not march with the troops. He stood on the stand alongside the widow of a sergeant and the mother of the radio operator. Others marched by, young cadets, reserve officers, and trainees. Their uniforms gleamed with new medals, Yet, the brightest light shone in their eyes, the understanding that honor has a price but cannot be sold. After the parade, the veteran took off his cap and gazed at the sky. Up there, in the clouds, they are listening too, he whispered softly. His son nodded, thinking they would be proud. Near midnight, the family gathered on the balcony to see off the passing day. Moscow was wrapped in the gentle rustling of leaves. The veteran raised his mug of kvass. For those who believed, his son added. For those who endured, his grandson finished. For those who never sold out. The clinking of mugs rang out. Far away, a train whistled, an echo from the old front. The veteran remained deep in thought. He closed his eyes and heard the footsteps of friends, the distant roar of gunfire, the pop of a signal flare. But instead of fear, warmth filled him. He knew that the war he remembered had ended, and a new kind of memory had begun. The memories yet to come. A month after the parade, a letter arrived from a small village in Siberia. Inside the envelope was a child's drawing. A boy was holding a medal and smiling. In shaky handwriting, the note said, "Thank you to Grandpa Cooper for my freedom." There was neither an address nor a last name, just a postal stamp and the scent of fresh paint. The veteran placed the drawing on the table next to a photo of his unit. He ran his finger over the paper. "This is why it was all worth it," he whispered. His wife came over and embraced him. "As long as children remember, we are alive," he nodded, feeling the weight of many years lift from his shoulders. In that moment, he understood that victory was not found in sentences or laws. Victory blooms when a child draws without fear of color. Then he sat down at his old typewriter and began to write his memories, not for glory or medals, but so that someone, opening the book years later, might hear the quiet voices of those who left and step forward with a little more courage. On the 1st of May, when birch trees wore their fresh green leaves, Cooper left the house without his military jacket. He wore a simple gray blazer, set his cane aside, and leaned on his son's arm. His knee hurt less than before. The doctors had given him a voucher for a sanatorium, yet more importantly, the old heavy burden pressing on his chest was gone. He walked not as one accused, but as a witness to time. By the memorial of the unknown soldier, the air smelled of fresh carnations. The veteran placed his bouquet carefully and stepped back by one pace. To him, General Morgan approached. His greatcoat was spotless, yet patches on the elbows hinted at an earlier era. "Ivan Petrovich," the general said, "I have wanted to ask for a long time. Why did you not leave the pass when ordered to retreat?" The veteran paused, for there was a boy lying in the snow. "I could not abandon the child. He was younger than my son." The general nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes disobeying an order preserves part of it." Two old soldiers stood silently for a moment. Then the general reached into his pocket and took out a small book. "This is the diary of that boy, found in his backpack. I kept it without knowing whom to give it to." The veteran accepted the book. Written on the cover in faded ink were the words, "Mama, if I return." He held the diary close to his heart. A week later, the family traveled to Cooper's birthplace. The road cut through rye fields. The elderly bus driver recognized the veteran and smiled without words, steering gently so the passenger would not be jolted during the turns. In the village, neighbors greeted them warmly. One brought a samovar, another carried a basket of pies. Around the table, they spoke of the weather and the Easter services, but never mentioned the scandal. People understood that some pains are not talked about like gossip. After lunch, the veteran walked to the old ash tree where children were playing jump rope. He sat on a bench. A girl with braids came up and asked, "Grandpa, is it true that the medal is heavy?" "The medal is not heavy," he replied. "What weighs is carrying it honestly." The girl heard, understood, and ran back to her friends. That evening, the son wandered to the pond where he had once caught fish as a child. He sat on the dock. To him, the father joined them. "The city is noisy," the son remarked. "Here it is quiet." Silence. "That is also an answer," the veteran responded. "In the stillness, you can hear the truth of your heart." The son exhaled deeply. "You know, I feared we might not endure." "We endured because we stood together," came the reply. During the summer, the local administration decided to inaugurate a new memorial dedicated to doctors who lost their lives at the front. Cooper was invited as an honored guest. Beneath the sun, school children in white shirts stood alongside girls wearing headscarves. The orchestra played a solemn wartime anthem. The veteran approached the microphone. His hands were steady. "We erect monuments not for bronze, but for the heart," he said firmly. "As long as the heart beats, memory lives on." The words were simple, yet the faces of those listening brightened. After the ceremony, a young doctor approached. "Thank you," he said. "Sometimes we have night shifts, and I wonder if I will manage now." "You will," the veteran smiled. "Honor is not a bayonet. It cannot be broken if you hold it tightly." In autumn, when leaves swirl like letters without addresses, the veteran sat in the kitchen. His grandson arrived late, holding a diploma. The golden embossed emblem gleamed under the lamp. "I graduated from university," he announced. "I want to join the prosecutor's office." The veteran lifted his gaze. "It is tough there, full of temptations, I know. But if the best leave, only the worst will remain." He placed his hand on the diploma. "Go, but remember, the law without conscience is an arrow without a feather." That night, the veteran could not sleep. He reread the diary of a soldier boy. The last entry was brief. "I want to go home. Mother, I believe I will return." The veteran closed the notebook and placed his photograph nearby. In his heart, a question stirred inside him. Have I truly returned? The answer was warm and clear. Yes. 1 year after the trial, the grandson arrived at the school as a young lawyer. He gave a lecture to the children about what honor really means. The veteran sat quietly at the back of the classroom. A 9th grader asked, "If everyone says honor is outdated, then why does it matter?" The grandson smiled gently. "Honor is as old-fashioned as bread, but life cannot go on without bread." The veteran heard this and felt his heart swell with a quiet pride. It was December. The house was cozy and smelled of pine and apples. The family decorated the Christmas tree. At the top, instead of a star, they hung a small wooden medal carved by the grandson. The wife lit the candles. The veteran raised his glass of fruit drink. "To the warmth in this home," the son added, "and to the light within our hearts." The grandson said, "To truth in the law." Exactly 2 years after that unfortunate court session, the family stood before the courthouse. The facade had been cleaned and the old inscription removed. A plaque hung on the wall reading, "Here justice was served. The law protecting combative honor was approved." The veteran ran his fingers over the bronze. Passers-by stopped but did not disturb. Someone quietly laid down a carnation. In spring, Cooper received an invitation to speak at an international conference about veterans' rights. He hesitated since he did not like public speaking. But his grandson insisted, "Your voice is needed." The veteran stepped onto the stage in the large hall and took the microphone. "Gentlemen," he began, "I am no orator. I am a soldier. So I will speak briefly. A medal is only metal, but behind the medal there is blood. When an official tears apart a medal, he tears the flesh of those who have died. They can no longer feel pain, but it wounds the living." The audience rose to their feet. That autumn, The veteran felt a deep weariness settling within him. The doctor advised plenty of rest. He smiled. Rest is when your soul feels clear. He wrote his will. A diary was to be passed on to a boy, the medal for courage handed to the museum. To the grandson, he gave instructions to keep it safe, but not to wear it. The sergeant's mother's medal was to remain in the family as a memory of duty. On the 1st of November, snow fell. A white blanket covered the rooftops. The veteran sat by the window watching boys build a snow fortress. His son came in and asked, "Father, do you remember when you said snow is like a blank sheet of paper?" "Yes, and children write on it." The son smiled and said, "Then winter is the time to begin." The veteran nodded. It is always time for them to start. The triumph was quiet, yet warm, like the gentle glow of home. Cooper understood that war does not end on the battlefield. It finishes in the heart when one is no longer afraid to live honestly. In the spring of the following year, General Morgan passed away. At his funeral, the veteran held the division's banner. A priest said a prayer over the coffin. The veteran stood there. No tears fell, but his voice broke when he said, "Rest peacefully, comrade. Your post is taken." The museum opened an exhibit about those who were once humiliated. Under glass on a display were a helmet, dent marks from a bullet, letters from the front, and newspaper clippings. The grandson led a tour for school children, saying, "Here is my grandfather's helmet. It saved his head when a fragment struck from above." A boy raised his hand and asked, "Aren't you afraid someone might try to take the medals again?" The grandson smiled and replied, "Let them try. Now our law protects the helmet." The memoir book was published with a dark green cover. Inside, there was a photo of the unit with the caption, They were simply doing their duty." The print run sold out quickly, but the veteran did not pay attention to the numbers. What mattered to him was something else. A letter arrived from a small school library. The deputy principal wrote, "Your book has been taken by the students. We are making photocopies so that everyone can have a copy." One summer evening, when the sun cast a golden glow on the rooftops, the veteran was sitting on a bench. A teenager wearing a cadet uniform approached him. "Comrade Colonel, may I ask you a question?" "Go ahead." "What is more important, courage or duty?" The veteran paused to think. "Duty without courage is like a chain without links. Courage without duty is a bullet without a target. Both are needed together." The cadet quietly repeated the answer, as if it were an order, and then stepped away. In autumn, the veteran visited the cemetery to see his fallen comrades. The path wound through the pine trees. He placed pine cones on the grave markers. This was how they used to do it at the front when there were no flowers. He sat down, leaning on his cane. "Comrade," he said softly, "we have won." Quietly, but surely. The wind stirred the pines, dropping needles. That was the reply. In December, soft snow began to fall. The veteran returned home and took off his hat. His wife was waiting with hot tea. "Are you cold?" she asked. "I am warm," he replied with a smile. "When your heart is on fire, winter is nothing to fear." He opened the window. A cold, fresh, invigorating breeze rushed into the room. The veteran inhaled deeply, feeling his lungs fill with life, and whispered, "Thank you." In January, on the day of the Epiphany, the veteran woke up before dawn. The silence was broken only by the ticking of the clock. He dressed and stepped outside. The snow crunched under his boots. On the river, a hole was being cut in the ice. Young people were preparing to plunge in, laughing and encouraging each other. Cooper moved closer. A young man waved at him. "Grandfather, will you be taking a dip too?" The veteran glanced at the water from which steam was rising. "I already took a plunge. Back in 1945, When an icy blizzard hit us, we marched for a whole day. Since that time, I am no longer afraid of the cold." The young man chuckled. "Then warm us up with your words." The veteran raised his hand, as if offering a blessing. "Remember, the water washes away fear, but not debts. Both the young and the old carry responsibility toward their homeland." As the sun climbed higher, he went back home, settled into his armchair, and dozed off. The dream was peaceful: a field, a summer breeze, friends laughing by the fire. No one was rushing, no one was firing. He woke with a smile. In spring, his grandson brought a folder containing a new law about social benefits for veteran pensioners. He flipped through the pages, explaining to his father that some phrases needed clarifications. "They will find loopholes and twist the meaning," he warned. The veteran took a red pen and carefully crossed out unnecessary words, substituting synonyms so as not to distort the original sense. "Precision is a lawyer's greatest weapon," he said. "It is not with sharp phrases that one wins, but with exact words." In summer, the family visited an old church damaged by war, but now restored. Inside the dome, the scent of incense filled the air. The priest guided them to a wall, displaying a list of benefactors. "There will be fewer names than donors," the father explained. "But honor does not lie in lines on a wall, but in deeds." The veteran lit a candle for his fallen comrades. Stepping into the yard, he noticed how the new bell gleamed in the sunlight. "This is a symbol that the past can be preserved." "To heal," said the veteran. "It is easier to call than to shoot." In the fall, a letter arrived from Paris. A French historian requested permission to publish a chapter about Cooper's trial. The Sun translated it. He wrote that your case has become an example of how society can protect the dignity of veterans without revolutions. The veteran smiled slightly. "If a Frenchman needed my experience, it means that the feat knows no boundaries." On December 31st, the family gathered around the table. Outside, fireworks exploded in the sky. The veteran lifted a glass filled with warm fruit drink. "Let us welcome the year without fear," he said. His son added, "and with the memory of the past." The grandson smiled, "and with plans for the future." The wife placed a dish with honey and nuts on the table, wishing the year to be sweet and strong. The clock struck 12. Outside, colorful lights flashed. The veteran closed his eyes and whispered, "And thank you." "Yeah,